We're going to start our story of Gettysburg on the first day's battlefield. And the most iconic spot on that battlefield is the Seminary Ridge Museum. My friend Codie is going to show us around.
Hi, Chris.
How you been?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for bringing us here and letting us take a look at the museum.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Now, you've got a lot of layers of history inside what is really a giant artifact. Tell us about it.
It really is. We like to say this is our largest artifact that we have of the museum, is the building itself. It's been here for nearly 200 years, since 1832, inside of which we tell the story not just of the seminary and the rich history that this campus has, but also what happens here July 1st, 1863, during the first day of the battle, the use of the building as one of the battlefield's largest hospitals, and that story of race, slavery, religion that have played out here for nearly 200 years.
And if I'm correct, the cherry on top is the money view of the battlefield.
It absolutely is. The cupola up on top of that building, a space that not only provides us with a 360-degree view of this landscape, but was even used during the battle in 1863.
I can't wait to take a look. Let's go.
Let's do it.
So what's the best way for us to attack this building?
Well, it's a large building, of course. It has exhibits on each floor. Normally, we'd recommend visitors start at the top and work their way down. We're gonna save that great view from the cupola for last for you. So we're gonna start at the bottom, work our way up.
Oh, I can't wait. So as we come to the first floor of the museum, what's the story that you're telling here?
So this is the story of the why. The thing that really draws people into a museum on a battlefield is the story of the battle itself, which we tell upstairs, as well as the story of the building's use as a medical facility after the battle. But really here we're taking a look at why is this battle being fought that is leading men to need medical care in this facility. And we're in a building that has stood since 1832. It's just north of the Mason-Dixon line. It drew students from both northern and southern markets. And so many of those controversies that are playing out nationally are playing out right here within the walls of this building, including, of course, that major issue of slavery that is leading these sections of the nation to split apart.
Now, being so close to the Mason-Dixon line, with slavery south in Maryland, free state north in Pennsylvania, this is really the front lines of emancipation if people are self-emancipating.
It really is, and this is going to be an area where, as we talk about on this floor and in some of these galleries, there's Underground Railroad activity, there's slave catching coming from the reverse angle. We also have a lot of free African Americans living in Gettysburg and throughout Adams County in the summer of 1863. And so we oftentimes think of the 10 roads leading to Gettysburg as being, of course, extraordinarily significant for the armies getting here, but it's also those roads being so close to that line between Pennsylvania and Maryland that for decades led to this battle that plays out before there's a shooting battle here at Gettysburg.
And then when the war actually shows up in July, what does that do for the free African Americans who are living around here, where suddenly the Confederacy's on their doorstep?
We see a lot of accounts starting especially to the west of us in Franklin County, around Chambersburg and points south of that, of a lot of white diarists and eventually memoirists talking about this sort of mass exodus of their black fellow citizens and saying, many of them were born free here and are now suddenly being taken into slavery. And by the time that the armies are arriving here at Gettysburg, we see that in many cases, black people in Gettysburg and its surrounding communities, they too have sort of heeded this warning and are fleeing. Even right here at this building, we have Samuel Simon Schmucker, who was the seminary's founder, first president, namesake for Schmucker Hall, which the museum occupies today. He writes several sermons against slavery in the pre-Civil War years. He has Southern-born students who, by the time we get to the Battle of Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Campaign, they're aware of Schmucker being this key, sort of almost militant by this point in time, proponent of universal abolition, as he says at one point. And he'll be targeted, and he, just like a lot of African Americans from the area, he too flees before the Battle of Gettysburg breaks out. His house is ransacked by Confederate forces at the tail end of the first day of the battle. And so there are many different pieces of this story that we highlight here.
Now I want to back up to something you said a second ago, because you mentioned men and women born free taken into slavery. What's that about?
Yeah, so we have here throughout 1862 all the way up to 1864, for the 3 middle years of the Civil War, Confederate incursions into south central Pennsylvania. Gettysburg is the most famous, but there are Confederate cavalry who came to the area around Cashtown, just west of Gettysburg, in 1862, the Confederate burning of Chambersburg in 1864. And so we have this military story here, of course, of white civilians having this almost boy who cried wolf situation for a little while until battle does come out on their doorsteps and in their backyards. But then we also have, of course, this line so close between slavery and freedom. Slavery not abolished in Maryland until 1864, so Pennsylvania is right up against the slave state. And we have the Confederate Army, which of course is based on a nation state that is committed to creating a slaveholding republic. And a lot of its soldiers feel as though they are able to act upon that. We have things like Lee's general orders, which forbid the taking of private property, but we also have instances where Confederate soldiers are blatantly saying in their diaries, talking about taking African Americans from Pennsylvania. We have individuals high up in the Confederate Army talking about returning contraband when the Confederate Army is starting to gather right before the Battle of Gettysburg. So there's this sort of dark undercurrent to the Confederate invasion as well.
I'm just a little stunned by that, because essentially you're talking about free people being kidnapped and sent into slavery.
Yes, indeed. And we see this play out for the middle portion of the war. We're not exactly sure how many people this happens to, but we have ample primary source evidence that can back up that this is a phenomenon that is happening.
Wow, that's incredible. So now we've moved up to the 3rd floor. What's the museum story here?
The museum story here is the story of the Seminary Hospital, one of the largest, longest serving hospitals on the battlefield. Starts as an aid station, becomes a field hospital, and then it stands for 2.5 months as one of the battlefield's longest serving general hospitals, serving soldiers of both armies. In each of these spaces, we can see that there are these sort of true-to-life recreations of each of the steps. All the way from when soldiers are first brought in as wounded, to surgery, to treatment, and ultimately to their long-term recovery. And here we see Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland, who was the final patient to leave the seminary hospital 2.5 months after the battle. He's here long enough that his family comes to visit with him for some amount of time. And when we press these buttons in each of these rooms, we're able to hear the words that are largely written in or about the patient experience for those who were here.
It looks as though he had a leg amputated.
He did indeed. So he's shot through both legs simultaneously the first day of the battle, right off the northwest corner of the building. He'll have his right leg amputated. He won't stand on his left, even with the assistance of crutches, for 42 weeks, the better part of a year. He'll live with the repercussions of this wound for another 28 years, dies in 1891 while seeking treatment still for his Gettysburg wound. And so it's a good example of, though he doesn't die as a result directly of the Battle of Gettysburg, he's still suffering from these long-term consequences.
Now, do you know much about the people who were treated here as patients?
We do, incredibly. So a lot of it was digitized as a result of something that we were able to take out of the National Archives. And here's a scan of the original lists that are created. We don't exactly know when this was created, but it appears that there are nearly 500 names on it. We've been able to identify several patients who were not mentioned on this. And thanks to grant funding we received in 2023 from the organization Americana Corner, we were then able to digitize and continue adding to this list. We have not only the names here of the patients who were in this hospital, but if we've been able to add photographs, any known information about their tenure here in the seminary hospital. And then we also have lists similar to this of all of the attendants and nurses who were here, as well as the doctors and surgeons.
So this floor sort of talks about the aftermath of the battle. The next floor up puts us in the vortex of battle itself.
It does indeed. It shows you the first day of the battle that leads to many of these men needing medical attention here at the seminary.
Let's take a look.
Let's do it.
So we've made our way up now to the 4th floor. What story do you tell here?
This is the story of the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. As you follow through each of these rooms, you're going through the day chronologically from morning until nightfall.
And when we come into this room, we see these great murals in each of these rooms, but this one shows just how close the fighting was to the building.
It absolutely does. There's a series of 10 pieces that were commissioned by renowned military history artist Dale Gallant that largely go through the story of July 1st and its effect. And here we have withdrawal of the 151st Pennsylvania, the last regiment that falls back from Seminary Ridge. We can see the rail barricade in the foreground, constructed just a couple hundred yards beyond the seminary building, and the building itself that we can see in the background. Each of these spaces that has these murals is surrounded by artifacts related not just to Gettysburg and not just to July 1st, but especially in these cases, these are pieces from soldiers who were in this regiment or right here on Seminary Ridge, whose stories played out right around this building that now tells their story.
And after the armies kind of sweep through here, the building gets used as a field hospital.
It does indeed. It becomes one of the largest on the battlefield. Starts July 1st as just a Union divisional field hospital established by Dr. George New. There'll be mostly Union patients here for the duration of the battle. And then once the Confederate Army leaves Seminary Ridge, after it goes back and forth a couple of times from July 1st to July 5th, then this becomes a general hospital for both armies to be treated.
Now we're on the 4th floor. One more floor to go. What's next?
The next thing up is the attic, the most original piece of the building, and that's the gateway to the cupola.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, this side is 1890s. That side is original as far as we know, 1830s.
Oh, wow. What a cool space. Great woodwork.
Yeah, these the stairs themselves have been rebuilt, but a lot of these are original pieces of the building that were from where the elevator shaft is now. And then we also have the cupola burned down to about this point in 1913 and then was rebuilt. And it's
So, Codie, what am I seeing as I look out across the town in this direction?
We're looking out to the east. As you mentioned, the town of Gettysburg at the time of the battle was just about a third of the size it is today. So when we think about differences between then and now, 160 plus years later, a bit more open at that point in time. But as we like to say is Gettysburg has not really grown upward, though it's grown outward. So we have this remarkable view that you would have had this wide panorama to Gettysburg and beyond is quite similar in many respects to what was here in 1863.
What are some of the key landmarks I might see as I look across town?
Yeah, for those familiar with the battle and the battlefield, some things that still stand today and offer good landmarks for us. One would be that big white clock tower that sort of rises above everything toward the middle of Gettysburg. That's the Adams County Courthouse, which is built a few years before the American Civil War, and so that's there in 1863. It also gives us a nice sense of roughly the center of town, just a couple blocks south of the square. It's a little difficult to see with the naked eye, but we can see as we look toward the center of town, there's the Gettysburg Hotel with the windows facing us on the tan side. To the right of that, we can sort of see the brick outline there of the David Wills House, where President Lincoln famously stayed on November 18th into 19th, 1863. So there are those couple of features in the town itself that become quite apparent. And then off to the northeast of us, we see the full collection of buildings that today make up Gettysburg College, then known as Pennsylvania College. A bit larger of a campus today than it was at the time of the battle, but certainly a key landmark with some surviving buildings from 1863, just like here at the seminary.
Now, if we step to the other side of the cupola, we're going to see the view of the first day's battlefield itself.
Not only the first day's battlefield, but I would say a view that looks remarkably like it would have in 1863.
Like a time capsule.
Like a time capsule.
Oh, let's step over.
All right, let's do it.
So we've walked over to the other side of the cupola. What are we looking at from this perspective?
So this is sort of the money view. This is the area that folks in 1863 as well as today are especially interested in, because as history has come to know it, this is Buford's view. This is the view that John Buford, on the evening of June 30th, 1863, morning of the first day of the battle, July 1st, this is the direction from which Confederate forces are largely coming. And so we can see sort of through the haze in the distance there, some of the foothills of the distant South Mountain Range from which most of the Confederate Army is coming. We can see some of the nearer ridges then, about a mile from here. There's sort of a bright red barn roof that highlights for us Her Ridge, where the first major fighting picks up the morning of July 1st. And then a bit nearer to us, the tree line right across this field where some vehicles are traveling along Reynolds Avenue with the monuments lining it. That gives us a nice sense of the crest of McPherson Ridge. The tree line there, famous for many different names, most prominently Herbst Woods or McPherson Woods, where General John Reynolds is killed. The McPherson Barn is just obscured from our view, but just beyond these trees here, of course, namesake for the ridge, Edward McPherson and his property. And then we can see one of those historic 10 roadways leading into Gettysburg, both then and now, through these trees here, Route 30, part of the Lincoln Highway, better known to battle aficionados as the Chambersburg Pike.
And if we continue along the Chambersburg Pike, over here we can see a key piece of property that the American Battlefield Trust preserved, Lee's headquarters.
Absolutely. We can see it sort of tucked between a couple of those white structures in the distance. We can see the top of the of one of the windows there, as well as a chimney, the gray stone edifice of the south end of the Mary Thompson House, property that has so many connections historically to the story of what happens here at the seminary. Mary Thompson was one of the caretakers before the Civil War of this very building. And ultimately then, of course, plays a key role as another major structure here in July 1863 as Robert E. Lee's headquarters, and one of a few pieces of property on Seminary Ridge preserved by American Battlefield Trust, in addition to the northwest section of the seminary campus here, which sees some severe fighting on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863 as well.
So I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we get to enjoy a lot of this view thanks to the supporters of the American Battlefield Trust who made this possible. When you come up to the cupola and you have the chance to have a moment, what do you think about? What resonates with you? What comes to mind?
One of the big themes of history in general that sticks with me are the stories of these folks whose names we don't know, but their words live on, the stories that they wrote about live on. And one of those people is right here in 1863, and that's Lieutenant Aaron Jerome, this relatively unheralded signal officer who has risen through the ranks. And he finds himself here on the staff of General John Buford in 1863. And without his writings, based on the observations that he makes here the night before the battle and the first day of the battle, there's a heavy chance that maybe we're not standing here today, because he really puts onto paper for the first time the story of why this place is significant, the story of that it is used as an observation post. And he gives us, in addition to that, in his writings, right after the Civil War, a crisp, clear view of what he could see from here, the campfires and the dust being kicked up and the anxiousness of the moment as General Buford is standing with him, making observations of the Confederates coming from the west, of Union reinforcements coming from the south. And so those words sort of play out in my mind anytime that I'm up here as this figure who most visitors to the battlefield probably don't know his name, but surely they have heard the story of the seminary and of the cupola. Without him, they may never have done so.
Now, the cupola is made famous in the movie Gettysburg. Sam Elliott as John Buford comes up here and he's looking with his spy glasses and he gets reinforcements. Do people like to come up here and do their own Sam Elliott impersonation?
They do. It's not uncommon that we have somebody either yelling up if they're on a bike tour or walking past the building, "What goes, John?" And people in the cupola love to yell back, "There's the devil to pay." Even unprompted, folks will yell that part down just to get out that Sam Elliott impression. And dare I say, I think we get just as many, if not more, people asking, "Is this the cupola in which Sam Elliott stood?" as we do people who are familiar that the real Buford was here as well.
Well, I suppose I should give it a try.
What goes, John?
The devil's to pay.
Can you hold?
I reckon.
I can.
Codie, this has been a real privilege to explore this museum. Do you want to give people a little pitch to come on and explore this for themselves?
Absolutely. You can visit our website, seminaryridgemuseum.org. We also have seminaryridgeeducation.org for some of our K-12 educational resources, information on group visits, things like that. We are open in the key months of the year, sort of the summertime especially, 9 to 5. You can find our full schedule for the off season as well on our website. But here you'll get the full story of the first day of the battle at a building that was itself a part of the battle, as well as, of course, that story of religion, that story that plays out in the story of the seminary itself, and Civil War medicine in a place where that medicine was actually practiced for nearly 2.5 months in the aftermath of the battle.
Codie, it's been a real privilege.
Likewise, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.